Now coming back to the question that Mrs. Harper is facing. So Mrs. Harper wants to have the number of books in her library. So for doing this, we can make use of the count aggregate function. So count, as the function's name specifies, is used for counting how many times that particular column has appeared, how many times that particular entry has appeared. So right now, since Mrs. Harper wants to have the total count of a library, so let's just say this is one example of a library. So she wants to count the total number of entries that are inside her library. So we can make use of the count aggregate function. So let's try to count the number of entries that are inside the library. So for doing that, we will make use of the function count. And then inside that, we want to count the total number of entries. So we will make use of asterisk. So asterisk specifies all the entries from the library. Let's try to run this. So over here, we can see that the name of the column is coming out to be count. So by making use of alias, we can rename this result. So let's just say we want to return it as total count. And then let's try to run it. All right. So by making use of alias, we have renamed the result column as total count. And then it is returning the count of entries that are inside this table. So we can see that there are 10 entries that we have made, and the total count that we're having is also 10. So using the same aggregate function, Mrs. Harper can also count the total number of books that are in her library. So one more thing that Mrs. Harper wants is that she wants to count only the books with specific genres specified. So let's just say for this particular table, we have specified some different genres. So let's just say we have fiction, we have classic, we have romance, we have fantasy. So for doing that, we can make use of select statement, and then we want to count the different types of genres. So we can specify the column name, which is genre. And then we can make use of alias as total count of genres. So where do we want to fetch these values from? We want to fetch these values from the table name library. Okay, let's try to run this. All right. So the different types of genres that we are having, they are 10. Okay, right now we have entered value for every column in every row. But let's just say if we have entered the value as null for one of the publication years that we were not aware of. So right now we want to check if the values for the column publication year, whether they are valid or not. We want to check if every entry is valid or not. So by making use of the count function, we can check if any of the values has been entered null or not. Let's try to run it first. So for the book, we can see Chandrakanta, the publication year is null. So count function helps us check if there's any invalid entry for any of the columns. So what we can do is we can make use of select statement and then specify the count aggregate function. And then we specify the column that we want to check as total valid entries, and we use from table name library. So what this will do is, so this will check that this particular value, this particular column has any entry as null or not. And if it is null, it will discard it, and then it will return the count of valid entries. Let's try to run this. All right, so we can see that total valid entries are returned as 9. So since the null entry is being discarded, the count is returned as 9. We will make another entry as null. Let's see what happens. Let's try to run this. All right, so as we have made one more entry null, the total valid entries, so total valid entries for the publication year column, it is returning 8 as the answer. So we can make use of the count aggregate function with columns, and we can also use it with asterisk for checking the valid entries and then return the count. Next, Mrs. Harper wonders what's the average publication year of the books in a library. So for figuring out the average publication year of the books in her library, she can make use of the predefined aggregate function called average. So how do we work around with average? So for returning the average, let's say, of the publication year or any other column for that matter, we can make use of the average aggregate function. For specifying the average aggregate function, we make use of the keyword AVG. So just like we were specifying the count using count, so we specified the average using AVG. So we can use this function. Let's try to use this function for getting the average of which column. So we can specify the column as publication year, and then we can specify from, and then the table that we are working with. Let's try to run this. So the average publication year that we are getting is 1926. So right now we are getting the column name as average publication year. So we can make use of alias to rename the result column as average publication year. So right now we can see that the value that is being returned from this query, it has been renamed to average publication year, and then the answer is returned inside that column. So with this information in hand, Mrs. Harper can see whether the library leans more towards the older classics or modern titles. Okay, now Mrs. Harper also wants to know how many total copies of the books are available in her library. So let's just say she has 2 copies of Hobbit in her library, and she has 3 copies of The Jungle Book in her library. So in total, she has 5 copies of 2 different books. So let's take this example. So this example is a replica of what Mrs. Harper would be working with. So she's having a column, copies available, which specifies the copies of every book. So like over here, we can see To Kill a Mockingbird, we are having 5 copies. For 1984, we are having 5 copies. So what Mrs. Harper wants to know is how many total copies she has in her library. So for doing that, she can make use of the sum aggregate function. So for doing that, she'll use the select statement and then make use of the sum aggregate function. So she wants to sum the values that are present inside the column copies available. So we will specify the column copies available, and then we'll make use of from to specify the table that we are working with. So the table over here is library. Let's try to return it. Yeah. So we are getting the sum of copies available as 40. So 40 specifies the sum of all these values. So by making use of the sum aggregate function, we can get the sum of a particular column. So over here, we are making use of sum to get the accumulated sum of the values inside the column copies available. Moving on, to highlight the diversity of a library, Mrs. Harper asks 2 important questions. So she asks that what is the oldest book in her collection and what is the newest book? So for getting the oldest and newest book in her library, she can make use of the minimum and maximum aggregate function. Working with minimum aggregate function, we can specify MIN, which is a short form for minimum. And for working with maximum aggregate function, we can make use of MAX, which is a short form for maximum. And she can get the maximum value for the column that she wants to work with. And then she can get the oldest and newest books. So let's just say this is the table that she's working with. Let's try to comment this. So for getting the newest and oldest book, we can make use of the publication year. So on this column publication year, we'll make use of the function, the aggregate functions, minimum and maximum. So let's try to do select minimum for the column publication year. And let's try to have an alias to this answer as oldest book here. And then we can have another value returned as maximum, which will return the maximum publication year as newest And since we are working with a table, we'll specify from and then the name of the table library. Let's try to run this. All right, so we're getting the oldest book and newest book as a result with the values as 1813 and 1968. We can verify this from the publication year. So we can see that within this column publication year, 1813 is the lowest value, which specifies that this is the oldest book. And then 1968, and this is a 1968, which is the newest book in our collection. So now she knows the range of publication here, helping her showcase the richness of her collection. So over here, we can see that we have made use of multiple aggregate functions and we have returned multiple values. So we can make use of multiple aggregation functions together and then make more analysis and wise decisions from our table. So let's just say we want to add one more aggregate function called count, which returns the total count of the rows that we have in this table. Let's try to run this. Yes, so it is returning 10. So we can make use of multiple aggregate function and return the values using select statement and return their values. So let's try to understand how aggregate functions has transformed Mrs. Harper's library. So it is all because of SQL Aggregate function that Mrs. Harper can now unlock valuable insights from her catalog. From counting her books to finding publication trends, these tools have empowered her to manage her library more efficiently and serve her readers much more better. Now it's your turn to try these aggregate functions in your database, in your datasets, and see how they can simplify your data analysis and give you more insights on your data. I hope you had a good time learning more about SQL and aggregate functions. Happy coding, everybody.